moment when we scroll up and down our page, you may notice that this code does run, whereas at the moment on our project, this only runs on page load. So if I refresh, then it runs, but they all run at the same time. Now, why is that? Well, if you remember from before, we have the code right at the bottom of our page, which is just run on page load. So this run random is going to run all of this box just on page load. So how do we make sure this runs when we actually see things, when things scroll into view? Well, luckily, JavaScript has a relatively new thing called the IntersectionObserver, which lets you do things like lazy loading of images when something is scrolled up and down the page, things like infinite scroll, and in this case, when things come into view. So when this comes into view, we want to run some code. How does it work? Well, again, it's kind of like following the instructions. So I'm going to scroll down this page and use some of this example code in here. So what we want to do is make a new intersection observer. So when we scroll up and down the page, we run some code. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're not going to do this in run random. And the reason for that is we want to listen out for certain tags and then run random. So here what we're going to do is on kind of between the two, it's going to make a new constant called observer. It could be let, because if we change it later on, it doesn't really matter for now. But this is going to be equal to a new intersection observer. So this is part of JavaScript. It's something that we can use out of the manual and use it in our code. So in here, we need to run this. What do we need to put in here though? What do we want to listen out for? Well, what we can look at in our intersection observer is it has two things: a callback and some options. Now we'll ignore the options for now, but what we need is some kind of callback which takes some entries, and the entries are what is happening, some intersection observer entry objects. They have different things on them, such as, can we see this right now? Is it intersecting with the page, as in, can we see it? What time did it do that at? There's a lot of things we can actually add into that. So the first thing we need to do is run some code about the intersection observer entries, which sounds complex, but when we do it, it'll make more sense. So the first thing we need to do is listen out for all of these entries and do some code. So I'm going to write the word entries and then pass all of the entries to some code. I'm going to open up this code and then we're going to add something to this code. What do we want to do? Well, what I want to do is loop over each of these entries, the H1s and the H2s, and then check whether they're in view. And if they're in view, I want to run random. So here what I'm going to do is for each entry, so I'm going to pick the entries and do for each one, I want to run something. I want to run some code. What code do I want to run? Well, I want to pass each individual entry to some more code, some more curly brackets. And here I'm going to open this up. So what do I want to check for? So entries is going to be a list of intersection observer entries, so plural. And each one of these has a few things in it. So entry, kind of what we've done here, what do we want to look for? Well, I'm going to look for the intersection ratio. How much of this tag can we see? If there's more than half on the page, we want to run this thing. So now in here, I want to do a check. If round brackets, curly brackets, if this entry has an intersection ratio bigger than 0.5, as in half of it can be seen, we want to do some code. What code do I want to run? I'm just going to open them up. I want to run random. Run random. What do I want to pass to that? Well, I don't have a tag in here to pass to it, but I do, if I look here, I have entry.target. This is the tag that we're currently tracking. So in here, I can pass the entry.target. So entry.intersection ratio is how much of the tag can be seen, and then .target is the tag itself. Now at the moment, this code doesn't run, doesn't do anything. It's not listening out for any objects. It's not observing anything. But what we want to do is run this on page load. We want to observe tags on page load instead. So instead of this running just on page load further down, I'm going to get rid of this. And instead, make this observer, which is all of this code, dot observe each tag. So now this will go and listen to all of these tags and run this code only if this intersection observer ratio is above half. So now if I scroll up and down the page, nothing is happening. It kind of happens occasionally, but not really that often. I can run really quickly up the page and it seems to work. Now, why does that happen? Well, the reason why that happens is there's another part to this. If we scroll back up the page, there's these options I need to put in as well. The options are here, the root margin, but mainly the threshold. Where do we want to run this? When does it pass visibility? So what I'm going to do is some extra options in here. The code for this looks like this. So here is all my entries, which goes from here to here. This round bracket matches up with this. So I want to pass in some extra bit. I'm going to basically spread this out a little bit more. So this curly bracket, I'm going to put a comma straight after that, and another curly brackets in here. And then with my curly brackets, again, I like to open them up just to make it easier to read. I want to pass in the threshold to run any of these code. So the threshold is going to be a list of numbers. That list of numbers is going to be something like 0, I can't see it, comma 0.5, because that's when I want to trigger this, and maybe if it's fully in view as well, comma 1. So now it's going to trigger this code if any of these things hit 0, 0.5, or 1. So now, if I scroll up and down the page, we have this working. This will work. This will work as well. Now you might notice if we scroll up and down really quickly, it starts to mess up a little bit. This isn't obviously the final bit of code. So what we want to do next is fix some of this issue when we scroll up and down and run this more than once.